So we've been told that if there's time at the end, we each have to do 20 push-ups in front of you. The bar was set pretty high. Steve just introduced Mike McCue, who's one of the most successful serial founders in Silicon Valley. Mike, I want to go to the founding of Flipboard. So the iPad launched in 2010. Flipboard launched not long after. The thought experiment at the creation of Flipboard was a really interesting one. And as I understand it, it was if the web was washed away and you had to rebuild it from scratch, start the web from scratch, what would you do? And that was the thought experiment behind Flipboard. Can you talk about the conclusions, the convictions that thought experiment led you to and that played out in Flipboard?
Yeah, I'm sure this has all happened to us at one point where you're writing an email. It's a great email. It's perfect. You got everything just right. And you're about to hit send, and the computer crashes. You lose the email. And you're like, oh, and you've got to write it again. Yeah. But when you write it the second time, it's better. You know, you realize, well, I probably could have done this a little bit better. Could have, been more concise here, and it ends up being better. That was the thinking around how I approached my next venture. I wasn't even sure I was going to start a company. I was just doing what I loved, following T. Boone Pickens' advice, just doing what I loved, building products, thinking about technology. And the big thing for me was I felt that content, stories, were being lost on the web. When you flip through the Atlantic or National Geographic, you have a narrative. There's a sense of pacing. There's a beauty to it. You have beautiful photography, beautiful typography. There are inset maps. There are pull quotes. There are things that kind of guide you along. You don't have any of that on the web. Now, increasingly over time now, it's getting better. But back when we were starting Flipboard 4 years ago, the web looked like it was frozen in the mid-90s. And so we wanted to say, well, look, if you were going to build a new web today, if you were going to build the web today, you would optimize it for these mobile touchscreen devices. So that was one of the key things we wanted to do, is say, look, the reason why magazines are so beautiful in part is they don't have to have lots of UI controls. You don't have to have a toolbar and a menu bar and a sidebar and a navigation bar. You just have great content, and then you just use your finger to flip through pages of that content. So that was something we really wanted, was that beautiful presentation. And with a touchscreen device, you can lose all the user interface, and you can have that kind of beauty. The other really important thing is the power of people. People know how to tell a story. People know what makes a great story. And we wanted to leverage social. The idea that the web is becoming not just connection of an article to another article, which is a very powerful thing, but now it's a person to an article. It's a person to another person, a person to a group of people. So you have this new curated web that I don't think we as an industry have even begun to grasp how powerful it is.
And so the core things were visual and social, essentially, navigation of content. It's almost 5 years since the launch of Flipboard. What do you know now that you didn't know when you were imagining what the web should be almost 5 years ago?
Probably the biggest thing is the importance of people and machines interwoven together to create great content. And the second thing would be the importance of structure to content. So what I mean by that is, today, you have social media, and there's just this ongoing stream. It's an infinite stream. People posting things, endorsing content. That's very powerful. However, great stories help influence people. Great stories move the world forward. Great stories have an end. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And in this world of infinite streams, there is no end. When is the end? How do you have a sense of timelessness when everything is always real time? How do you allow people to step back and think about things and have that context and understand what really matters? And so that's something that we really believe in, and I really want to try to figure out how to enable that to happen. Again, you had that in print. You just don't have that in social media. And so that sense of people contributing content, but in a way that can be more structured, can have more of a narrative form to it, I think is really, really important.
So you have an interesting aggregate view on some really kind of fundamental questions. The most fundamental of them is, how do people spend their free time? How do people spend their waking hours? And because you see people using your app, you actually know when they're awake and when they're reading. And across the world, you see patterns of things. So what are some of the most interesting and surprising takeaways about how human beings use their free time, or at the very least, what their reading habits look like?
Well, one of the most shocking things is how much people use their phone to read. People spend a lot of time on their phone reading, and it can be a 50-page article, and they'll read it if it's a good article. And so the other thing that's been encouraging has been the amount of great long-form journalism that people want to read. The problem is it's a little too hard to sort of filter out the noise. You get distracted by other noise before you get to that great content. But people do want to be able to read that. So those are two observations, and they kind of go together. People will read long-form journalism on a phone if it's presented well. And that's tricky to do, but if you can do that, I think that's a pretty big deal.
What's your watch strategy? Will people read long-form journalism on the Apple Watch or the Samsung watches, or are you thinking about presenting content on watches?
Well, not so much presenting content, but perhaps presenting moments when you might want to go look at some content on your phone, more contextual moments. And there's a variety of things there. Of course, there's the obvious, like, okay, there's breaking news. You might want to know about that and go read it. But also the not so obvious, like you might be in a location. You might be standing near the White House, and you might get a notification that there's something really interesting about this right now, this place that you should know about.
So it comes in via your watch and then leads you to your phone.
To your phone. They're very much linked together.
Yeah.
I think there's a tremendous amount of linkage between the phone and the watch that I think is going to be critical.
So we should talk for a second about tablets. So Flipboard was essentially launched with the iPad. What's really interesting is that iPad sales, at least, are falling. So in the last quarter, they were down something like 12% from a year earlier. And there are people now who are saying that in between the larger and larger smartphones, the phablets, and the lighter and lighter laptops, like the MacBook Airs, what is the purpose of a tablet computer? What's the purpose of an iPad? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, tablets are still growing quite fast. They may not be growing as fast as they were a year ago. Part of that probably is due to the fact that you have some larger screens on phones now, and phones are starting to become more like tablets. But also part of that is that the tablet, from a form factor point of view, hasn't achieved a fundamental breakthrough from where we started. It's gotten thinner. The new iPad Air 2 is really a beautiful product, incredibly thin and light. But I think there are still opportunities for it to break through further, to have it feel more like paper. And I think when that happens, you'll see that there'll be a continuation of that tablet form factor. But the idea of a touch screen is with us now everywhere, and I think you're going to see that on laptops and computing devices that will be able to be used as a tablet or a laptop. You'll have phones, So these worlds are blending together.
I want to ask you about a few companies that you work with very directly. One of them is Apple, and one of the big concerns or questions when Tim Cook took over was, is Apple going to be as good at product, at design, in the post-Steve Jobs era? We've now had a few years of this, the latest raft of products. What's your verdict on that?
Oh, I think Apple is alive and well and thriving, and there are a lot of great product leaders at Apple that are still there. Johnny Ive, of course, being a good example, but there are many others. And I think Tim has done an amazing job at marshaling the creative energy, the innovation, in a way that yields great products time and time again. And so, I think they're doing incredibly well.
Facebook. So much of the focus on how people consume content is around Facebook.
Right.
You have media companies that have sprung up whose strategies really are built primarily around distribution through Facebook, in some cases of other people's content. It's very much, Facebook is the mechanism for the creation of companies, for the consumption of content. How do you see Facebook's involvement with media content consumption right now?
Well, it's evolving. They're certainly in a significant role, as is Twitter, LinkedIn. Social media in general and social networks are a very, very fundamental part of how media is discovered right now, particularly by millennials. I mentioned before the social web, this idea that people and content are intricately connected together in ways that were just never before possible, and Facebook is a big component of that. But they're not the only one, and I think it's important that there are multiple places like this where this curated web is developing.
Do you think it's distorting that content is being created to play to Facebook's algorithms?
There's always a risk of that. There's also, for example, the so-called linkalism. The headlines that are written specifically for SEO, for Google to pick up in search results. You're always going to have a little bit of that. But I think that this is where the great journalists are separated from the ones that aren't so great. I think the ones who really have something to say, the publishers, publications who have a strong point of view and really believe in the power of editorial, great journalism, are going to be able to thrive. And so Facebook is, if you know how to use it, can be very helpful, as can Twitter, LinkedIn, Flipboard, across the board. You need to think comprehensively. It's just kind of how the web works now.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important elements here is that it's easy for you to fall into the trap that everyone needs to come to our site and look at our content structured in our way. And there will be people who will do that. But also, you need to be able to think about your content in an atomic way. These atomic units that travel throughout this curated web. And there will be a group of people who are really passionate about something. For example, on Flipboard, I found a magazine this morning called Middle East for the Perplexed. And it's a guy who is, handpicking great content from around the world about the Middle East to help explain it to, normal people, mm-hmm. Without all the hype. And that's a really big deal. That idea that person is forming a new node in this curated web. Yeah. And with a collection of all this great content. And so for publishers, it's really important to think about that. That person could be, in this case, on Flipboard, but they might be on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or all of the above. That's just how the web works now.
Yep. ComScore put out some new research in August, and what they concluded is that the average U.S. smartphone user downloaded 0 apps per month.
Right.
In a world of how do you reach new users when people aren't downloading new apps, and in many cases are using only a handful of apps to find on their home screens?
Well, the good news is there are literally billions of apps being downloaded. So there are definitely people downloading apps. So we have, for example, 250,000 new users every single day on Flipboard that are coming in and setting up Flipboard. So people are definitely still downloading. But I also think that you have to figure out, smart strategies. So, for example, our publishing partners help promote Flipboard. You need to, make it in other people's best interests to promote your app and create an ecosystem, ideally. And that will help, get, you to rise above the noise of, a million apps or so that you could possibly download.
So I have 2 questions I want to make sure we get to. One is about the future of your company, and one is your own future. Mm-hmm. So the future of the company first. You've raised around, I think it's reported around $160 million. You launched about 5 years ago. How close are you to either an IPO or a sale or some conclusive event around Flipboard?
We are just beginning our journey. The thing that is so exciting about the space that we're in and Flipboard itself is this is just the beginning. Just the beginning. There is so much more that's going to happen with great content, media, this curated web and mobile. Just the beginning. If you look at a screenshot of the web from 1996, which wasn't that long ago, it's amazing the difference between where we were then, and where we are now. And again, we're just beginning. So Flipboard has a long journey ahead of it. And an IPO is a milestone along the way. But I don't think so much about that as I think about the entirety of the journey.
So you've said that as a boy you dreamed of being an astronaut.
Right.
This hasn't happened yet,
no,
I assume.
Not yet.
But you're in a place, kind of surprisingly in some ways, that is at the center of a lot of the private efforts to, for private space exploration. You have Elon Musk, who is talking very openly about trying to start a colony on Mars, I think.
Yeah.
Are you tempted to rekindle your astronaut?
I'm a little less tempted after the Atlas explosion yesterday.
Yeah,
but, you know, I did promise my wife that I wouldn't go into space, which at the time seemed like an absurd promise. Like, of course I'm not going to go into space. Like kind of the sleeves out of your vest, right? Yeah, I won't go into space, don't worry.
Yeah.
Now I'm realizing, actually, I could go into space if I wanted to. I could actually, we're probably not that far away where I can buy a ticket into space in my lifetime. That's unbelievable. And, you know, so, but I promised I wouldn't do it because, you know, it is dangerous. And I'm the father of 4 kids, and I have an amazing wife. And
you don't think she'd reconsider?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Mike McCue of Flipboard, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.